Michael Penix says he'll be ready week one. And what can the Falcons learn from the two Super Bowl teams to construct their own championship blueprint?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. And today's Locked On Falcons is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Now, if you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we'll be recapping my observations from day 2 of the Senior Bowl, coming from you from an undisclosed location in Mobile, Alabama. We'll also be discussing the potential Falcons Super Bowl winning blueprint, looking at the Patriots and Seahawks to see what we can sort of borrow from them and what lessons we can learn from them and constructing that. But we'll start off today's episode talking about the news of the day that swept through Falcons Twitter earlier on Wednesday, which is Michael Penix's timetable for return. There was misreading a text or something like that, from Zach Klein of WSB TV initially, but he got the correct, response was ultimately that, Michael Penix told Zach Klein that he's going to do everything in his power to be ready week one. And I say that is a nothing burger of a statement. Every player that's coming off an injury says that exact same thing, and time will tell. Now, certainly it could happen for Michael Penix, right? He's already recovered from 2 ACL tears, and so in theory, that should give him a leg up on the third ACL recovery timetable. Third time's a charm, as they say, come back quicker and sooner. So anything is possible. Mac Hollins could win the Super Bowl MVP. Zach Robinson could guide Baker Mayfield to an MVP season next year. And just off screen, Salma Hayek is waiting butt naked for me to finish recording this episode. So, as I say with all things, I'll believe it when I see it, but let's at least discuss the possibility and give Michael Penix the benefit of the doubt. As we know, he had surgery in late November. I believe it was like 25th or 26th of November, if I recall correctly. And generally, it's a 9-month timetable for recovering from an ACL tear. That would put him back around late August 26th, which is roughly 2 weeks before the 2026 regular season starts. But if he's going to be able to play in week one, he's going to have to come back probably at least a month sooner. So he's going to have an 8-month recovery as opposed to a 9-month recovery, because there's probably going to be at least 3 or 4 weeks for him to ramp up to get ready to play week one due to that injury and the fact that he's going to be playing in a brand new offense. And that's not something that this is not old hat where it's like, oh, I've been in this offense before, I know exactly what it is and whatnot. Now, we saw Joe Burrow, when he dealt with his knee injury, similar knee injury, come back after 8 months back in 2021 and ultimately lead the Bengals to the Super Bowl. If Penix could come back on a similar timetable, we're going to get to have a conversation about, should he play in the preseason again, as we always do every summer, because it's always a good topic of conversation. Unlike Raheem Morris, who refused to play his starters in the preseason, Kevin Stefanski has traditionally played his starters in the preseason at least for one game, that third and final preseason game by all accounts. And how much those guys play, varies from year to year. Looking back, Baker Mayfield played 16 snaps. That was the low end back in 2021. And then on the high end, Jacoby Brissett played, I think, 33 snaps in 2022 when he was the week 1 starter due to the Deshaun Watson suspension. And so the question about the preseason is going to be, will the Falcons risk re-injury to Michael Penix? Because he definitely needs the reps. That's the one thing that we definitely know for sure, although I'm sure it will be certainly a compelling argument here on this podcast and elsewhere throughout the summer, should he come back and be ready to play and clear to play in the preseason. But, The question, of course, is going to be who else is going to be at quarterback here in Atlanta. That's going to be a big topic of discussion all offseason long. You know, we do not expect the Falcons to just put all their eggs in the Michael Penix basket, and they're going to have another viable option to pivot to, even if Michael Penix does get cleared early. And they'll probably sign that veteran quarterback long before Michael Penix gets cleared in July or early August, presumably in this very optimistic standpoint. I don't think that's going to be Easton Stick. It could be Kirk Cousins. The Falcons will cut Kirk Cousins and potentially bring him back, but I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to come back unless he's basically assured to be the week 1 starter by the decision makers, and we'll see if that's the case. But if it's somebody else, will there be a competition, or will the Falcons just kind of hand the job over to Michael Penix uncontested? Now, for the record, I don't particularly think that quarterback competitions really are beneficial to anybody, but perhaps Kevin Stefanski feels differently. It's hard to say at this point. But Michael Penix saying he's planning on being ready week 1. It's like, okay, cool, Mike. I'll believe it when I see it. Just like I'll believe it when I see it when you told us last summer that you were comfortable working under center, or that you were comfortable rolling to your left or your right on bootlegs. And we clearly saw that he struggled rolling to his right. But, if Michael Penix is ready week 1, that will allow him to be part of this team's future plans in 2026 and obviously beyond. And the hope is that, in the future, whether it's 2026 or beyond, the Falcons will have a quick turnaround under Kevin Stefanski, just like the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, who will be competing in 10 days for a Super Bowl. And let's talk about what helped those teams have a quick turnaround, and maybe some things that the Falcons can borrow from them as they construct their own sort of successful Super Bowl winning blueprint. And we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So managing your finances can feel overwhelming, from subscriptions to bills. It's easy to feel like you're losing control. Who has time to track every transaction and hunt down all those hidden fees? And that's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that's going to help you take control of your finances. It's going to find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It's going to monitor your spending, help lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. I love the fact that it tracks my subscriptions and lets me cancel them right in the app with just a few taps. I don't necessarily have to hunt down any customer service numbers, and I can build a budget as well as goals, stick to that. And, alongside, I get real-time alerts for large transactions and upcoming bills so that I'm always on top of my finances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster by joining rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. And wouldn't it be nice that if doing your taxes was just as easy as handing the ball off to Bijan Robinson? With TurboTax Full Service, you can hand off your taxes to a local expert and not have to stress about it from start to finish. It's just like handing the ball off to Bijan Robinson and standing back and letting him cook. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out the forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They're going to handle everything: your W-2s, your self-employment forms. They're going to work to get you every deduction. All you got to do is upload your documents, go about the rest of your day, and you can get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver. It gives you real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling, just like you get the peace of mind knowing that an expert running back like Bijan Robinson is handling the football. So for a limited time, get your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. So before we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast that makes it your first listen each and every day. That means you are the reason why Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. I had a random person recognize my sweet, sweet Locked On hoodie today at the Senior Bowl, and he was like, "Hey, you guys are doing real big. You guys are #1." And I'm like, yes, the messaging is clear. And if you want to level up your everydayerness, why not join the Everydayer Club, a special invitation only for the true everydayers of shows like Locked On Falcons and other Locked On shows, where you get an ad-free version of Locked On Falcons. You get Discord access, you get merch, similar to this hoodie that I'm wearing. And all you got to do is hit that link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com for $5 a month or $50 a year. You can be a member of the Everyday Club, so go check it out. So as we sit here, as the Falcons have a new head coach alongside currently 7 other teams, and 2 more are in going to make those hires, but a total of 10 teams have new head coaches, and every single one of them is going to believe that our coach that we hired are going to follow in the footsteps of the Patriots and the Seahawks, who will be facing each other in the Super Bowl in roughly 10 days, with a first-year head coach in Mike Vrabel in New England and a second-year head coach in Mike McDonald in Seattle. And both of those teams had very quick turnarounds, which is not unusual in the NFL. We've seen so many teams and coaches, like Sean McVay took the Rams to the Super Bowl in his second year there. Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni both took the Eagles to their Super Bowl in their second years there. Bruce Arians, year 2 for the Bucs. Dan Quinn, year 2 for the Falcons. Zach Taylor, Kyle Shanahan were able to take their respective teams, the Bengals and the 49ers, to the Super Bowl in year 3. And I don't recall the exact stat, but there's like a stat out there that basically if a Super Bowl coach doesn't win a Super Bowl in his first 5 years, he's never going to win one, which I don't think is technically true, because Andy Reid won his Super Bowl in Kansas City in year 7. But it's basically like the vast majority of coaches take their teams to a Super Bowl within the first 5 years. And so in theory, Kevin Stefanski has a 5-year window to potentially get the Falcons their first Super Bowl win of this franchise history. And we sit here wondering, like, how are you going to be able to pull that off, Mr. Stefanski? Do the impossible and get a Lombardi trophy here in Flowery Branch / Atlanta. And for me, the blueprint is simple, right? It's not easy, but it's simple. You got to be elite at something. And by elite, when you hear me say that word, that's basically you're so good at a thing that someone could make a very compelling argument that you're the best in the league at that thing. And you go back to the 2016 Falcons, that was obviously their offense and their explosiveness that year. For the Pats team, it's a very similar story. They have, a really high-powered offense, 3rd in EPA this year, number 1 in explosive plays of 20-plus yards this year, similar to that 2016 Falcons team. For the Seahawks, it's really their defense that's elite, number 1 in DVOA, number 1 in EPA, number 1 in third downs, number 1 in points allowed, and I'm sure in several other metrics. And so the question is, what is going to be that thing that the Falcons are number 1 in, potentially, or top 3 in, or whatever, in terms of being elite? And when we look at either side of the ball, we look at offense, right? Looking at the explosiveness, right? That's a real big part of your success. And the most explosive Kevin Stefanski-led offense that he's ever coached and coordinated came in his first 2 years, in 2019 with the Vikings, in 2020 with the Browns. Both of those teams were 10th in explosive plays in those respective years, primarily fueled by a very explosive ground game. Both of those teams were top 5 in 20-plus yard runs in those respective seasons, but middle of the pack in 20-plus yard passes. And hopefully we're going to see Tommy Rees, the Falcons' new offensive coordinator and play caller, be a little bit more capable of unlocking the passing game. And based off of the 9-game sample that we saw last year, he was able to achieve that, relative to what Kevin Stefanski was able to achieve in the first 8 games. In those first 8 games, the Browns had 14 explosive pass plays last year. And in the 9 that Tommy Rees called, they had 21. So, seemingly more open to a more explosive passing game. And you do wonder, with a big arm quarterback like Michael Penix, who definitely is going to be ready week 1, there's a lot of upside to the Falcons having that explosive passing game. Last year, we didn't quite see that manifest, which was, to me, one of the big reasons why last season was a relative disappointment for what Michael Penix was able to provide. The Falcons were middle of the pack, ranked 18th for the first 11 weeks of the season when Penix was the starter in terms of explosive pass plays. So I think if we're going to see an uptick in that number, we're going to have to see the team invest more resources into explosive weapons. And, maybe we'll talk about a couple of those guys a little bit later in the show when we talk about the Senior Bowl. But, defensively, can the Falcons become the top-ranked defense in the NFL? It's certainly possible, given that Jeff Ulbrich, the Falcons defensive coordinator, coached the top-ranked defense in the NFL, at least based off of expected points added from 2022 to 2023. So he done it once. He can do it again, right? And I think they can if they continue to invest in that side of the ball. They were 14th in EPA last year, so that's a good start. They're already slightly above average, and so if they continue investing in that, they can continue to climb up the charts. So this is why you're going to continue to hear me say things like, the Falcons, this is kind of a 2-year cycle for the Falcons. They need to make investments this offseason, next offseason. I think that's going to potentially put them on a path to success, whether that means that they'll be playing in the Super Bowl at the, come 2028 or whatever. We'll have to sort of see. But, I think these next 2 off seasons are going to really make or break this team and really put them on the path to success or path to failure, kind of make or break this football team. And then when we boil it down specifically to the coaches, right? When we compare Vrabel and McDonald and look at Stefanski, right? Vrabel's a very successful CEO type head coach in New England. He hired a very competent offensive coordinator in Josh McDaniels, and that spearheaded a breakout year for Drake May, who is the presumptive MVP runner-up. I'm assuming Matt Stafford's going to win the MVP, but I assume Drake May will get the second most amount of votes in that regard. And the question when you apply Kevin Stefanski, who's basically adopting more of a CEO role, as we discussed on yesterday's episode, handing off the reins of the offense to Tommy Rees. Can Tommy Rees be Josh McDaniels? Can Michael Penix be Drake May? I had the discussion with an insider who told me he thought that May and Penix were on a similar level from a talent standpoint. I don't quite agree with that, but it's certainly possible that we can see Penix get elevated beyond expectations, in the future. So we'll just have to wait and see. I think the challenge for this team is going to be, because we know a Stefanski offense is much more of a run-first team. Can they build the type of passing attack that you need to be able to reach that ultimate level? Time will tell on that issue. But again, a lot of that's going to depend on the quarterback and who's in the skill room. And I think, we hope that Penix is the answer at the quarterback position, but we'll have to sort of see on that front. But, you look at the defensive side of the ball, or particularly with Mike McDonald, as we discussed during this coaching cycle, you look at a lot of the successful teams around the league when it comes to hiring coaches, they hire a hyper competent coordinator. And Mike McDonald is a hyper competent coordinator. We talked about that when he was, the Falcons were interested in hiring back in 2024. And we talked about him as being the next Belichick, as the next defensive guru / genius. And he's very much lived up to that hype these last 2 seasons in Seattle. And so, Stefanski, because he's not going to be calling plays, cannot necessarily be that hyper competent coordinator for the Falcons. But even if he doesn't necessarily live up to that, maybe the Falcons can kind of get halfway there, so to speak, or maybe 3/4 of the way there is probably a better way, where it's just like, okay, Rees is going to take that big leap as a play caller to get the offense to a level comparable to what we're talking about with Josh McDaniels, and Jeff Ulbrich is probably not on the level schematically as Mike McDonald, but certainly proved himself to be a very competent coordinator last year. And so it's like, okay, well, we might not be number 1 in these things, but maybe we can be number 5 in both of these things. And that together makes us number 1 overall, right? That's kind of what I'm hoping for at this point in time. So we'll see if the Falcons can, get that upgrade in terms of the coaching with Stefanski and Ulbrich continuing, and Rees, as well as I think an upgrade in terms of their talent level as well, rather than just sort of this singular coach through the force of will that is often the narrative, depending on how this Super Bowl plays out. Either Mike Vrabel will be like, oh, he's just, the greatest coach of all time, or Mike McDonald's like, oh, he's clearly the greatest coach of all time. And that just comes with the territory when you win a Super Bowl, where everybody sits here and believes that, you just magically had this ability. And, hopefully we will be having that conversation about the Falcons at some point in the future, within the next 5 years, and hopefully sooner than the next 5 years. So we'll see on that front. But if the Falcons are going to need future investments in order to get there, some of those investments may be down here in Mobile, and we'll break down some of the observations I had on day 2 of Senior Bowl practice, looking at some of these corners and wide receivers that could be cornerstones in terms of the improved Falcons passing attack, as well as their defense, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So we know the Falcons don't necessarily have the most illustrious history of hiring coaches. They find someone that looks really good on paper, and then we find out it's not quite the right fit. If only the NFL and NFL teams like the Falcons had Indeed sponsored jobs. Today's sponsor to help them find the right match. Now, if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. All you got to do is stop struggling to get your job post seen on other websites. Indeed sponsored jobs is going to put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a higher than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing the candidates that check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. You can get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job that premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. With football season almost over, I know you guys are going to miss the crowd noise, the energy, the cheering alongside other fans. Being in the stadium hits different. But don't worry, you can still get that fixed by getting back to your local NBA arena. If you're looking to score tickets fast, Game Time is your go-to app. They take the hassle out of buying tickets and give the advantage back to where it belongs with the fans. Open the app, and within minutes, you can have tickets for an upcoming Hawks game locked in. I know you're locked on. Why not be locked in with Game Time? What you see is what you get. The price you see is the price you pay. No worry about hidden fees at checkout. Plus, you can preview your seat before you buy with their panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today, and remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. So let's wrap up today's episode by talking about day 2 of the Senior Bowl. We're gone into the week really focusing on the wide receivers and corners, 2 areas of concern where, the Falcons have a number 1 wide receiver in Drake London, who soon should get paid like a number 1 wide receiver, and they need to hopefully find a cheap number 2 to offset that and build that guy into, one of the better number 2s in the NFL. And they have a number 1 cornerback in AJ Terrell, who's one of the better number 1s in the NFL, and hopefully can find a number 2, right? We talked so much about the revolving door at the cornerback position opposite AJ Terrell, where, with the exception of Mike Hughes in these back-to-back years, and unfortunately, shout out to Mike Hughes. He's out here doing his best, but, there's no world where Mike Hughes should have been the guy, the exception to the rule. But basically, AJ Terrell has played beside a different number 2 corner every year, week 1, since he entered the league back in 2020. And we want to stop that revolving door by, finding that long-term answer at CB, and that probably comes in the draft. So when we look at some of the guys that we had our eyes on, particularly at that cornerback position, I thought several of those guys stepped up on day 2. I thought they had a better day on day 2. Colton Hood of Tennessee, Chris Johnson of San Diego State, in particular for the national team, I thought stepped up. They were by no means perfect, but as we've discussed already, like, you kind of grade corners on a curve, particularly when you're looking at the one-on-ones, because the one-on-ones are so geared towards the offensive player, the wide receiver in this case, so that when a cornerback holds his own, you kind of count it as a win, as opposed to just straight up, he shut down this guy. And so I thought it was a more impressive day for both Hood and Johnson compared to day 1. When we talk about that national team, flipping to the opposite side of the ball, but at the wide receiver position, John Carroll, wide receiver, Tyron Montgomery, had another, we pointed him out as he was a guy that flashed on day 1 with a couple of nice plays, and he continued to flash on day 2. And John Carroll, being at Division III school, known for producing lots of general managers and NFL coaches, like Nick Caserio, I believe, of the Texans, and Josh McDaniels, of the Patriots. London Fletcher is the one standout player. But anyway, not to get distracted on John Carroll. But, one of the things the Senior Bowl can really do for small school guys like a Tyron Montgomery is, hey, like, this guy has legit ability. We've seen that so many times. Ali Marpet, Quinn Miners, to a certain extent, Quinyon Mitchell, making the jump from the MAC and shutting down guys 2 years ago here at that cornerback position. So Tyrone Montgomery, I don't know if I'll be able to dust up any John Carroll film throughout the offseason, but he's definitely played at a level where I'm like, I do kind of want to see if I can find some Tyrone Montgomery film to watch to see if this guy could be a legit answer at the wide receiver position, because he looks like a legit answer based off of how he's performed here at the Senior Bowl. Now, flipping to the American team, the afternoon practice, I thought Georgia cornerback Dalen Everett was fine. He got beat on a double move again. I don't remember who the wide receiver that beat him on. And again, it was one of those plays where it's just like, was that a real route in an NFL game? It's a very late double move where it's just like the receiver's like, I'm going to improvise a little bit. That's one of the drawbacks of this stuff. It's a lot of improvisation, and that's what makes it so hard on the cornerbacks. So I don't want to ding Dalen Everett too much on that, but it stood out to me. Now, another one of his teammates, Malik Muhammad of Texas, had a nice PBU in 11-on-11 that stood out to me. But, the American team, right, the national team had a lot of the corners I liked. The American team had a lot more of the receivers I liked. And so that's really what I was focused on in that afternoon practice. And Malachi Fields of Notre Dame, the wide receiver, had a really nice grab on a go ball, made a diving catch for a big explosive play. And, we're talking about explosiveness and adding that to the offense. Fields is not the fastest guy, but he's a long strider, and he can get on top of a corner and get behind the defense, and he can go get the football, as he showed on that particular play. So maybe some explosiveness in his future in the NFL. Cornerback Davison Igbinosun of Ohio State got beat twice by the other wide receiver I liked, which was USC wide receiver Jacoby Lane on a couple of deep balls. It was a better day for Jacoby Lane than on day one because of some of those plays. It was a rough day for Igbinosun. It was a down day for him. A number of times he got beat, not just by Lane, but a couple other guys in one-on-ones, and I think a couple of times in team sessions. Igbinosun's he's a project, is basically, that's what I thought of him watching the film. And the Senior Bowl has kind of confirmed that, he's very much a project. There's tools and there's upside there, but if you're looking for a plug, he's more of a Darian Porter, I would say, going back to last year, a third-round corner that is going to be a little bit more of a project than a plug and play. Oh, that's going to be your week one starter at cornerback. Maybe some of these other guys, but another wide receiver that stood out in the American practice that I had my eyes on going into the week was Ted Hurst. I thought he was more impressive on day one than he was on day two. But one of the things that I was concerned watching the film, and that's part of the conversation with the Senior Bowl, is like you're trying to fill in blanks in terms of the evaluation. And I thought Ted Hurst's releases were not as clean and polished as they needed to be. And again, that's something that you can teach at the next level. So it's not something that is like, it means he's a terrible player. But it did show up again in practice today, where I was paying attention to them. Like, those releases need to be a little bit better, particularly when he's dealing with press. He's just kind of like, and he kind of gets away with it because he's, like 6'3", 195 pounds. So he's just like, I'm just going to power through any jam that a cornerback does. And I think he was probably able to get away with that more at Georgia State, playing in the Sun Belt, than he is, playing here in Mobile, where he's dealing with a different caliber of corner. No offense to the Sun Belt. I know Maria Martin is is coming for me right now. But I made a mistake of slandering the Sun Belt last year when we talk about Mike Green. And boy, I know not to get on that woman's bad side. But so that's something we'll keep an eye on moving forward. Another guy that flashed again on day one that continued to flash was Missouri wide receiver Kevin Coleman. He's a smaller wide receiver, 5'11", 174, but he and at that size, you're like, he should be able to easily separate. Like, that's your whole thing. If you're going to be that small, you better separate, because you're not going to be able to, win contested catches at that size. So he did show that he can separate. So he's another guy that I'm going to have to go back and watch. I think it will be a lot easier to find Missouri film than it is John Carroll film. So we'll see on that front. So those are kind of the standouts here on day 2. There were other observations, saw some guys flash in the trenches. But I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of blanking on who those guys were. Like, I know the number in my notes, but I don't have a name attached to the number. Number 11 on the national team was killing it he was killing it as a pass rusher, and the national defense was dominant in the team drills. They were just kicking the butt of the offense. And the other thing that stood out to me was Garrett Nussmeier on an American team. He's the best quarterback on the team because the other two quarterbacks stink. Luke Altmaier and Taylor Green are just like, they were bad. It's like Nussmeier, I think Nussmeier has legitimately looked solid in practice, but the by comparison, like he could be a C, and he'll look like an A compared to the other two guys. But that's just my own personal observation. So we'll see what's in store for us on day 3, the final day of Senior Bowl practice. And that's going to do it for us here, guys. And continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to catch up with all the things going on elsewhere in the NFL, as well as check out the Everyday Club at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. $5 a month or $50 a year. Discord, ad-free version of the pod, as well as sweet Locked On merch. Go check it out. That's going to do it for us here. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Salma, I told you, put your pants back on.